I'm JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports. That's Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express News. We're coming to you on Sunday, the day after the Roadrunners' big 24-17 win over UNLV. Greg, the Roadrunners moved their record to 5-0 this season. It wasn't an easy game, though.
Yeah, absolutely not. But I think the biggest takeaway, and I think the place not to get lost from, is to just look at that 5-0 start. UTSA is one of 17 unbeaten teams remaining in college football. And obviously, if you think about from the start of the year, what you would have expected at this point, it's an incredible accomplishment. And they're so much farther ahead of where we thought. It's only the second time in program history that they've been 5-0. And the first time was that 2012 season where they were playing a couple D2 schools in there and a couple teams still transitioning to the FBS. So we're going to have a lot of stuff that we're going to nitpick over the course of this video, but I just want to put all that positive out there before we get into any of that.
Way to stay positive, Greg, from the jump. I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, the offense in this game. We didn't see Zachary Franklin play. I guess he's been injured. Coach said it was his decision not to play them. And they really kind of relied on the passing game in this game. There wasn't a lot of rushing lanes for the Roadrunners. That was a pretty good, UNLV defensive front.
Yeah, I thought Frank Harris had a really good game. He finished 24 of 30, 278 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he mentioned this postgame, which was good to jog my memory because I had forgot. But he talked all through the offseason and in the spring about wanting to get more accurate. And we really saw a lot of that on display. I mean, completing 80% of your passes speaks for itself to some extent, but these were not a lot of super easy throws either. He was making some tough throws on out patterns that I thought he was just kind of laying in there perfectly where his guys were able to get to it. And just generally making some pretty on-target throws that weren't complete gimmies by any means. So really strong game from Frank Harris, especially because we've talked all season about how it seems like teams just want to take away the rushing lanes from the Roadrunners. And so to be able to say, okay, they're not going to let us run the ball, let's put it in Frank Harris's hands and see what he can do. And to have him come through like that says something about, even against a team that they were supposed to beat by 3 touchdowns, says something about how this offense can function.
How much did the injuries, would you say, to the offensive line limited the run game? I know we didn't see Kevin Davis in the game. After the game, Coach Traylor said that the two tackles didn't come back until late in the week, so they didn't really practice all week. You think that played a factor?
Yeah, I mean, so they were shuffling all last year and even through this year, and the running game had much better showings than this. So I don't want to say that that's entirely it. One of the benefits of us doing this the next day is that the Pro Football Focus grades are already up by now. And I know that Rolf was the lowest rated of the offensive linemen. So Kevin Davis being absent probably had some impact there. But I do think that, I don't know, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Something with Sincere McCormick doesn't feel exactly the same as last year. It feels like there aren't these runs that he's been able to break away. And maybe that is just a product of the blocking and the defense. But there were times last year where it felt like he would invent a hole that wasn't there, or he would make a couple guys miss and break a big gain. And he would break through some tackles to generate some extra yardage. And it just sort of felt like, especially yesterday, that there wasn't that level of special play that we've seen previously, that he was kind of getting what was blocked for him and what was available. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's the mark of a good running back in a lot of ways, but it's not this like special transcendent thing that we've seen in the past. What do you think about the running game in general?
I just, I mean, I thought that defensive front was doing some stuff there with some stunts, or I don't know, different looks. Maybe UTSA just wasn't ready for it too. That combined with some of the struggles of the offensive line just, limited. I mean, and you're right, everybody's stacking the box against Sincere, but for whatever reason, they've still been able to have that production, even with, the 4 yards or 4.5 yards that Coach Traylor says he is. But I think we're still waiting for that huge, big breakout performance from Sincere, and I think that may come, as we get into conference play.
Yeah, I really don't know how much differently he's being defended now versus towards the end of last year, because at that point, the cat had to be out of the bag, right? And maybe it was just too difficult for people to adjust from whatever kind of scouting vision they had when they went their initial planning through the offseason to getting to game week to sort of retool the defense to take the runaway. But it feels like whatever emphasis you would have put on him now is the same thing you would have thought by week 8 or 9 last year. And he was still productive down the stretch of those games, at least more efficiently than we've seen to this point. So I don't know. It's just something I'm still keeping an eye on. We didn't see any of those like stumbles, I don't think this week. There were in previous games, it felt like, and they mentioned this for one of them, that like just in the backfield, he might not be able to have the cleanest footing and wasn't getting off to the best starts with some of these runs. And we didn't see that this week, but it was just the bottom line production. The average was not great. And it's just sort of been a trend a little bit to this point.
Let's talk about the receivers real quick. You mentioned Frank Harris's accuracy. We saw a big game from JT Clark, a super athletic touchdown catch there in the end zone, and Cephas with another big game. Just two monster games from those two guys.
I thought it was pretty telling how much Frank trusts JT Clark, because there was a play where if I'm remembering it right, I haven't watched the game back yet, but there was some pretty significant pressure in Frank's face, and he just kind of threw it up to him.
Yeah.
And he went and made a play, and I think that was a 30-something 40-yard gain maybe. And it was just telling that he has that trust in a receiver who's not always out there for a ton of plays. This was by far his career game. He finished with over 100 yards and a touchdown. And I thought that he stood out. And of course, Josh Cephas, we were talking about how Frank Harris in the offseason said, I want to be more accurate, and he looks more accurate. Josh Cephas said, I want to do more running after the catch, and he did a lot more running after the catch. These were screen plays that he was making big gains from, or kind of slant patterns and other short kind of crossing routes over the middle, maybe, that he was making something happen after the catch. So it's good to see that those guys are doing what they set out to do, and especially him to live up to that. And he had, it was close to 100 yards in a touchdown. I have the stats here. He finished with 84 yards in a touchdown, and yeah, a lot of that came after the catch. So it was a really impressive game from both of those guys to sort of step up with Zakari out of the mix.
Let's take a look at the other side of the ball here, Greg. The Roadrunner defense, to me, this is the big takeaway in this game. The turnovers, the sacks, the tackles for six sacks is a lot of sacks.
Mm-hmm.
Some quarterback hurries. I mean, there are some, I guess, deficiencies in the pass defense, but just overall, they were pretty good again. They were excellent against the run, and just phenomenal with the sacks and the pressure.
Yeah, to start with the positive again, I think you after the game looked at me and said that UNLV averaged 1.2 yards per carry. They had 35 yards on 29 rushes, and I was shocked by this. I guess it's just become commonplace for me that the Roadrunners run defense
every week they're doing this.
That it didn't stand out as much during the game, even though at the end it was obviously an incredible performance. It was the passing defense, like you mentioned, was an area of concern. They had that one completely busted coverage very early that went for the 63-yard touchdown, and it felt like there were some other big gains that were open throughout the day. And we asked about this last week, and Traylor said it was a combination of maybe missed assignments here and there, or just some communication things that haven't clicked all the way. And obviously it'll be a talking point again this week. So we'll see, because, we can get into Western Kentucky probably a little bit later, but they're going to stress that more than anybody else that they will face all season, and as much as anybody else in the country. So that's something that you have to have right to head into that game. And so we'll see what the answers are on that front.
Big game from Day Taylor. I mean, probably his best game as a Roadrunner, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It felt like, and there have been plays this season where he was pretty disruptive, but to come away with 2 sacks in this one and 7 tackles, and just kind of felt like he was around the ball a lot. And you could say that about a lot of guys. We've talked about when they have to go to their depth options, that those guys come through just like the starters. And we saw Jamal Sam come up with an interception after a deflection by Ken Robinson, who are 2 guys who are not always out there. And I forget who had the other interception, but generally I thought, oh, yes, correct. He stepped under that play on 3rd down. So they were able to come up with enough of those game-changing plays with the strip sack by Drew Prox that Lorenzo Dancer recovered, that they were able to create enough stops that way for times when the pass defense in general wasn't coming through. And I believe they had 2 turnovers on downs as well, including the last one, which was a sack by Clarence Hicks. So generally, I think that they came up with enough game-changing plays to overcome maybe some down-to-down stuff, especially in the passing game that wasn't perfect.
Greg, what did you think about the atmosphere in the Dome? I asked everybody after the pregame. I thought it was phenomenal, especially on the 3rd down and 4th down situations. What was your takeaway? I think we had 20,154.
Yeah, the most telling thing is when the offense has to say, "Hey, you guys are too loud. You got to calm down." That's the mark of when you're not only growing your attendance, but when you're bringing in new people who don't understand that already. You know what I mean? That's that was an interesting thing. I remember I don't think we've had to talk about that since I've been here as it relates to UTSA, because the fans were the fans and were the people who follow the program and are there week to week. And now, you are having a level of success where you are able to engage new people, which is really cool. I don't, they have to break out the stuff they used for the Commanders where it's like, offense at work, please be quiet. So that's really telling. And it was so funny when you've surfaced that clip last week of the UNLV coach. Somebody asked him if he talked about the atmosphere in the Alamo Dome, and he said, no, should I? And the first drive, third down, false start, and there was another critical one, third down, false start a bit later. So yeah, they had an impact in the game, which is all you could want. And I think it was interesting. Traylor admitted after the game that the players, like probably wanted a little bit more, but it's just going to keep growing through the year. Going up against a winless team in a non-conference game is maybe not the most exciting thing, even coming off a big win against Memphis. And so we will see if we get into conference play or maybe some more recognizable teams coming in here, if that continues to tick up. We've seen in past years where losing leads to a downward trend, so theoretically winning leads to an upward trend. And so we'll see how that unfolds, but I'm sure they'd love to be able to push 25 or 30,000 as the year goes on.
UTSA's next home game is homecoming against Rice in 2 weeks, which is, I think, a pretty recognizable name. And I mean, sure, Houston's not far from San Antonio, so I think we may see similar, even higher attendance in a few weeks.
If Rice brings even a couple hundred people, it just helps at the end of the day.
Did we hit all your takeaways in this game?
So I want to talk about the general approach to this game. And I know, obviously, they're going to tell you, we respect every opponent and we treat every game the same and all that. But I was thinking about, Zachary Franklin doesn't play. What is the difference between last week when he does play and this week when he doesn't play? And then same thing for Clifford Chapman in the secondary. Last week, they said, okay, he's going to have to wear a club, but he's one of our guys. Let's send him out there with the club. And this week they didn't. And I don't know, did he get more hurt last week, or did they just decide that they don't need him as much? And it's not to say that they didn't respect UNLV, but maybe there were some things held in reserve from a personnel perspective. And so then that made me think, well, maybe they're holding some stuff in reserve from a play calling perspective or from a design perspective of stuff they don't want to put on film. I mean, how often yesterday were you wondering, why is this play a run up the middle in, second and 8, third and 8, whatever it was? Is there stuff that they were kind of keeping on hold, knowing that next week's game is going to be an even bigger game? Or is that just kind of a shortcoming in the design of the plan for this week? I don't know, but it certainly seems possible to me that they left some stuff on the table, knowing that next week's game is more important than this one, and that they could probably beat this team either way.
I don't know from the personnel standpoint. I know that Zachary, from what I've been told, has been banged up. But
is it worse than last week? What happened last week?
I don't know if it was worse than he took a pretty big fall last week during the game,
but that was like the first play, right? Then he played all the other plays.
He did play all the other plays, yeah. So you're right. Maybe there is some. I mean, we saw 2 offensive linemen come back. If you're kind of paranoid about that, I don't know. It may be just the individual guys, like what the injuries are. I don't know exactly what the injuries are or what keeps, but from the play calling standpoint, absolutely there's a little bit of, I guess, chess going on, so you don't reveal too much to your conference foes. Because I mean, let's just talk about the red zone play calling. I mean, some of that stuff was head scratching, wasn't it?
Yeah, I would certainly, that's something I'm going to be focused on when I watch it back. And I think even coming into the week, their touchdown scoring in the red zone has been something that's come up once or twice and hasn't been great. And some of these play calls, I don't know, it seemed very, very conservative. I know you and I were both happy to see that they didn't go for any goal line fades this week. That's probably a pretty low percentage deal, but the replacement options didn't really turn out so well either. It felt like just a lot of, like I just said, like a lot of these kind of runs from the 7 or 8 yard line, where maybe that's a tougher situation to really get that level of push and momentum. And then even the one Sincere scored, I think they had to, how many cracks did it take to get from the 12 to the end zone? Because they got a new first down at the 2, and then he used a couple of those downs as well. And so, yeah, I don't know. It was certainly a grind once they got in close. They're going to want to find something more successful. And again, like I said, I don't know if they're keeping something in reserve or if that was just the game plan for this week and it didn't work out as cleanly as they would have hoped.
The other thing I wanted to touch on a little bit here was we saw Hunter Duplessis miss two field goals. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I really don't know. It's hard to tell from the box how far off they are, left or right. I can
Right.
barely even tell if it went in or not, to be honest with you. But I mean, it looked like, and Coach Trailer said this after the game, that he was striking the ball pretty cleanly, like from a distance perspective, and it just happened to be a little bit off. I think they were both off to the right. So I don't know if there's something there that he has to work on. He's certainly been consistent enough through his career that I could give him the benefit of the doubt on a bad day and say it's probably not something they have to think about too much going forward. But I know late last season there was talk about kind of like leg fatigue,
Yeah.
basically, where they
He
were trying
stopped
to give
kicking
more,
off.
yeah, they gave that more to Everett Ornstein. And so if that some sort of thing could be cropping up early in the year, maybe he was practicing a little bit too hard, kind of getting excited for this final year and trying to make the most of it, that we're seeing some of that. But it's early enough that maybe they could take the load off during practice and get him back into form. But again, this whole conversation might just be an overreaction to two little blips on the radar. So I don't want to make too much of that. But yeah, it is. We're gonna have to keep an eye on it.
So 5-0, Greg. The Roadrunners they've gotten a lot of attention these last few weeks. A lot of local attention. The AP vote came out today, and UTSA got their most points ever. And I mean, is it too early to start talking about running the table?
Well, listen, they're not even favored next week. So yeah, it's way too early. I was more comfortable talking about it a week ago than I am now, just because this performance against UNLV, they basically, I was looking at this just before we started talking. I think UTSA dropped from, I want to make sure I get this right. UTSA drops from 71 to 80 in the S&P Plus rankings, while Western Kentucky went from 87 up to 78.
Yeah.
So they passed them, and then you factor in a home game, and they're a 3-point favorite next week. And especially, we just talked about, Western Kentucky's best passing offense in the nation statistically, and that's where UTSA's biggest weak point is right now. So you can see why that would be a game that could give UTSA a lot of problems. And if they get past that one, then we can restart the conversation. But I think we got to be in 1 week mode here.
What, 1 week at a time?
Well, just this 1 week at a time. Then after that, we can look at the next 5 as a package if you want. I'm not gonna, or at least
A pod, if you will.
Correct. The one thing I want to mention is funny. When you talked about the AP and the 10 points, the highest voter was Reese Davis from College Game Day.
Wow, yeah.
Them at number 23. So
Wow.
maybe we can get game day to the Alamo Dome for something this year. If they have the right guy, they have the right guy in their corner. Is all I'm saying.
Did we hit everything today, Greg?
I'm gonna say yes. Well, how are you feeling about like next week and their chances going forward? Did yesterday change your overall kind of temperature on this team at this point?
I've had this game circled on my calendar since the beginning of the season because I've been watching this quarterback play, and the first thing I did yesterday after the game was pull up the Western Kentucky score, and I mean he threw it 60 something times at quarterback. And if there's one area of concern with the Roadrunners, it's the pass defense. I mean, I tweeted something out, and I think the second quarter is the pass defense a concern for UTSA, and have something like 18 replies and different versions of yes. So
Right.
I mean, it's going to be a heck of a challenge, and I'm excited. We're both going, so we'll get to see what happens in person.
Yeah, this is going to be an important game for their season, for the conference title hopes. You don't want to get lost in that part where it's still a race. If you end up losing to UNL, if you end up losing to Western Kentucky, and then that UAB game kind of catches you, nothing's really guaranteed as far as the conference title chase. Like obviously at 5-0, there's probably going to be a bowl game in your future, but the bigger goal of being a conference champion and competing for that is still very much in the balance. And this week will determine a lot in terms of those opportunities.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard to win this conference with 2 losses to get into the championship game. So we'll see. We'll see next week in the Metropolitan of Bowling Green, Kentucky.
The perfect place for a football game.
Yep. Well, that'll wrap it up for this week. The Roadrunners 5-0. I'm JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports. Greg, thanks for doing this on your day off. I appreciate it.
Of course.
We'll see you guys during the week.